Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles when you show up.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Hearing
Dowhouse,
about Mr. Pointless and fantasy
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
Well, all right. Thanks for coming back in to Operation Domination, live on @FF Advice Network on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be dropping the video on YouTube tomorrow, and will always be available on your favorite podcast app. Just look for Operation Domination Football. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mater. It is time for a Thursday night injury inquiries, and the list, thankfully, is not quite as long, but there is impactful names that we're going to have to go over regardless. But first things first, we need to get our guest introduced. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The #1 medical expert in all of fantasy sports. The one, the only, Dr. Brian Scott!
Thank you.
The Laser Show, the man, the myth, the legend himself, here to break this all down. This is how we get the edge, Brian. Look, we all do data at this point now. We all look at metrics. We are all measuring things all the time. What target percent share means what type of wide receiver, running backs, quarterbacks, all that stuff. But what really matters at the end of the day is who's actually healthy enough to play up to peak. And that's the issue here. And that's why we have injury inquiry.
That was an extra long one, I felt like, today.
I haven't been making it any longer, I promise.
Sure, a couple of grunts in there.
They're for me. The pain of my team in my league that's been a little bit rough lately. So, look, there's some names on here that we've talked about before, but there are updates that we need to go over and see exactly what they're going to be heading into this week and maybe a couple of weeks from now. So when you're looking at Anthony Richardson, starting off with the quarterbacks, it sounds like he practiced in full today. Do you think he's going to play this week?
Yeah, that's a good sign with an oblique injury. He was limited yesterday. If he's able to get in a full session today and then hopefully again tomorrow with no setbacks, I think we will see him make his return. It didn't seem like it was too serious to begin with, but I think giving him the week off was certainly a wise choice so that this doesn't kind of linger further down the line. We should see him be available and probably head in with a questionable tag, but it sounds like he's going to be ready.
Yeah, I don't know if people love that. I mean, there's some receiver injuries we're going to have to get into for the Colts, but honestly, like, you've been able to play... I'm having a little trouble with my mic here. You've been able to play wide receivers with Joe Flacco, not necessarily with Anthony Richardson. So it's been a little bit back and forth. And then Richardson himself was supposed to be this top 5 quarterback, just simply hasn't been putting up that kind of rushing production we're used to, or at least we saw for the first 4 games last season. And it's been a little bit rough from that standpoint. But because of the situation the Colts are in, which is they're not going to win a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco, you have to see what Anthony Richardson is for the future. So if he's healthy enough and he practiced in full today, then he's going to get back in there and play. But if you can afford to do it, I should say, because there's 4 teams on bye, and especially in your smaller leagues. But if you can afford to do it, stick with Joe Flacco, because Anthony Richardson, as Brian Scott would tell you, is cultivating here a bit of an injury history, right? It's because he went last year, this year. So hang on to Joe Flacco if you can, because when he does play, he's been a top 12 quarterback now with the Browns and the last couple games with the Colts. What about Aaron Rodgers dealing with an ankle sprain?
It doesn't sound like it's too serious. It's a low ankle sprain. He acknowledged that he's been dealing with it. Sounds like he'll be ready to go. They got that extra day, given that they played overseas last weekend and they have a Monday night matchup coming up this week. He was on the Pat McAfee show the other day and sounds like he will be ready. I'm sure he'll get some rest days this week and not do too much at practice, but that's not surprising. He's been around the league forever and an older guy. So we'll see. We should see him.
He's going to have a new head coach. He's going to have a new offensive coordinator, or a new play call at the very least. Nathaniel Hackett's been demoted in favor for Todd Downing, the quarterback's coach. For those of you who don't remember Todd Downing, he stinks. Okay, this is not an improvement over Nathaniel Hackett. I mean, this is a guy who was in Tennessee after Arthur Smith when the offense became completely anemic. This is a guy who coached over in Arizona when they couldn't do anything at all, to move the ball. So we haven't seen promising things out of Todd Downing. The only thing I will say is that maybe he'll put more of an emphasis on getting the running game going. With Aaron Rodgers there, look, at least he finally threw the ball to Garrett Wilson 20 plus times and finally got him going as a result of that. Hopefully, if you're a Garrett Wilson owner, the Jets aren't going to make the move to get Devontae Adams. In fact, Robert Saleh getting fired does make those odds a little bit less, to be honest, because I don't know how much more shakeup they're going to want to do on that team now as a result of that. So maybe you're going to be safe from that standpoint. But Rodgers plays, you're playing Wilson, you're hoping Breece Hall can get out of his funk. But a lot of flux going on with the New York Jets, as you know what, probably per usual. Derek Carr, he's dealing with oblique, but it sounds like a nasty oblique. Like he might miss a few games.
Yeah, well, I definitely think he will miss at least 2 weeks is what I'm predicting. They've already named Spencer Rattler the starter this week, the rookie quarterback, and they have a bye. So, that should give him enough time to recover. It did cost him some time in the last game when he got injured, although it was late in the game, so it wasn't really too important, but sounds like it's significant enough. And, don't forget, he's an older guy too. He's in his late 30s. Been in the league a long time. You don't necessarily bounce back from these types of injuries as quickly. So I think the 2-week time frame, given the bye week in there, should be helpful for him and get him back in a significantly quicker amount of time than if he tried to play through it. So keep an eye on that situation. But Spencer Rattler has already been penciled in this weekend.
Yeah, and look, Rashid Shaheen, we're going to talk about him in a little bit later. Spencer Rattler, I know he had an okay preseason. This guy is a wild card. He was a wild card in college. He's going to be a wild card here in the pros. It's either going to look great or look horrible, and I'm leaning towards horrible. People want to crap all over Derek Carr, and I get why. But we went from the first 2 weeks where they looked great, and the last 3 weeks since it's been awful. The key hasn't been Derek Carr suddenly went back to being crappy version of Derek Carr. The key has been that offensive line. When they lost McCoy, their center, everyone's been able to get pressure on them up the middle constantly. Everything's been breaking down. That's not going to change now with Spencer Rattler. That's been the biggest issue so far as the interior of that offensive line. I don't think Rattler's going to make anything look better than what it was. So now you're kind of left in a situation where Chris Olave, I think, is nothing more than a wide receiver 3, and he wouldn't even be that high for me if it wasn't for 4 teams on bye this week. I mean, that's how ugly this thing is getting right now. The only guy I feel comfortable playing is Alvin Kamara, who looks like he is going to be, in fact, okay, which is why I didn't really put him on our list. But talking about running backs, I know this guy's on a bye, but I kind of want to talk about him anyway because he's a big name. Devon Achane coming off a concussion. What do you think is going to be when they come off this bye? Do you think he's going to be good to go?
Yeah, I mean, the rest definitely does a body good when you're talking about concussions. That's one of the hallmarks of recovering from a concussion is literally rest and doing nothing. Very little stimuli for the brain. So now that they have a bye this week, this will make a perfect situation for him to kind of recover, get through the protocol, and hopefully get back on the practice field and work his way back in time for next weekend.
Yeah, let's hopefully we see that. So Zach Moss, he has a foot injury. What's going on with Zach Moss? Do you know?
I'm not exactly sure. Some type of foot injury this past weekend during a tackle or a block or something that he was making. I forget. He did return after it for a snap during the game, but then he wasn't available at all as that game, I think, headed into overtime or whatever it was. So, I think this might cost him a week here. Zach Moss is a guy who's been injured throughout his career, dating way back into college. He was one of the athletes I had featured on my pre-NFL draft injury special that I do every year, the year that he was coming out of college. He had a fractured forearm last year that required surgery. The guy does get dinged up quite a bit. His injuries, when they do occur, are usually not subtle or mild. So I think this might cost him at least a week, potentially more. We'll have to see what he does as we get going during the rest of this week and practices start unfolding here into the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, he was able to practice a limited capacity today, so I think that was a good sign there. It's still going to be a committee thing. Look, injury, no injury. The eyeball test, Chase Brown is a much better player. Now, he's still not at the point where they trust him in pass protection, and that's been the biggest holdback so far, is him being able to take over this backfield. But if it ever gets to that point, it's going to be the Chase Brown show. Until then, Zach Moss kind of still hangs around as that RB3 because he's getting enough work at the goal line situations on top of 2-minute drill. Let's talk about another guy, Jonathan Taylor. Now, we talked about this a little bit last week. We were making fun of the mild high ankle sprain, quote unquote, whatever that was really about. But what do you think? Are we getting closer to a Jonathan Taylor return?
Well, he didn't practice yesterday. I'm not sure what he did today, if he did practice or if he was
practice.
limited. Yeah, and so this is a concerning thing because let's not forget, just a few years ago, he had an off-season procedure on one of those ankles. He dealt with an ankle issue a couple of years before that consecutively. So this has been an ongoing thing throughout his career. If it's, in fact, the same ankle, which it sounds like it could be, then it could be a while before we see him back. This is not to be taken lightly. And, there are situations where sometimes guys can have similar problems on both sides if it relates to chronic or genetic kind of ankle instability issues, which this could be a part of that equation as well. So it's something to certainly monitor as we go forward. But it looks like he's definitely going to miss at least another week here, possibly more as we move forward.
Yeah, unfortunate. And look, maybe you don't have a better option to pick up Trey Sermon, who gets the bulk of the carries, who maybe gets you inside the 5. I don't feel great about it, especially in a matchup in their matchup this week. So, yeah, if you have no other option, maybe Trey Sermon can fall forward in the end zone for you like he did last week. It's not been pretty. He does not look good out there. He has like a fullback speed. It's just terrible. But if you have no other option on a bye week, maybe he falls in the end zone for you. I'm not super excited about that handcuff. This one's interesting to me, though. James Cook. This wasn't something we kind of knew about during the game. We didn't find out until start of practice that he was banged up.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it actually occurred in the game, and I don't think it cost him any time, like you mentioned. Nobody really knew about it until we headed into the week here and started practicing. He was limited today, and I believe he either didn't practice or was limited yesterday as well, but not exactly sure the extent of this injury, how significant it is. However, with the toe, and we assume it's the great toe, that's an important joint as we've talked about times past. That's something as a running back you need to change pivot direction, plant, and push off that foot. And that's an important joint to be able to do that. So if it's not healthy, you certainly shouldn't try to push through it if there's a major injury there, like a turf toe. So until he can test it out in practice, I'm hesitant to say whether or not he's actually going to be play. More than likely, he'll head into the weekend with some type of questionable tag. The question is really going to be, what is he able to do as we get through the weekend here? Now, he does have the added advantage of playing in the Monday Night Football game against the Jets. So that does help. But again, until you kind of really test this out, we may not know what we get out of him, even if he does play.
Yeah, I think the other question is, when are we going to find out, right? Because it is the Monday night game, so we might not find out until a little bit later into Sunday, hopefully. And Schefter, and Ian Rappaport and those guys are pretty good about trying to get that information out to us beforehand. But if you have James Cook, I would tentatively pick up Ray Davis. Now, there's been a little wonkiness going on with the backfield behind James Cook in Buffalo, where it looked like for sure first couple of weeks that it was going to be Ray Davis as the handcuff. Then Ty Johnson's been kind of getting worked in a little bit. Like last week, Ray Davis didn't touch the ball at all. Ty Johnson kind of looked more like the number 2. I think there would be a split to some degree, but Ray Davis has been looked at all summer long and for most of the season as the handcuff to James Cook, as his number 2, especially on early downs and down by the goal line. Maybe Ty Johnson works a little bit more in on passing down. So I still lean towards Ray Davis being the guy you want to own behind James Cook here. And I would tentatively pick him up to protect yourself heading into that Monday night game. This guy's a little bit interesting. Brian Robinson, who's been off on a tear with touchdowns, but didn't look great last week, and he's back on the injury report again with a knee issue.
Yeah, and this is not the first week that he's been listed with this. It seems like it's been going on for a couple of weeks at least. It could be one of those things where he's dealing kind of like an acute on chronic issue. That's, usually where you might have some chronic type of problem that kind of creeps up on you, gets a little bit inflamed, and limits your ability to practice. But he's been able to play through it, and he has been effective, at least in the short yardage and goal line game, which is what fantasy guys really want anyway, right? You want those guys crossing that goal line. And I think that's probably what we'll see him being primarily used for as we head into this weekend. I don't necessarily think it's going to be something that keeps him out of game action, although they don't have a bye for a while, if I'm not mistaken. So if he does try to play through it and it gets worse, this could end up becoming a little bit more significant and may cost him time. But as of right now, he's playing through it. He's kind of dealing with it and monitoring his activity during practice. But it looks like he's going to be good to go on the weekends here as we head into this weekend at least.
Yeah, the cool thing, like laid out, he's getting all the work inside the 5-yard line with the RPO action with Jane Daniels. It gives the defense something else to think about. And in a week like this, again, 4 teams on bye, I can't get him outside of my top 20. Am I a little bit nervous about him? Yeah. I mean, we talked yesterday on the show and we did our week 6 preview. Make sure you go back on our YouTube channel at Fantasy Football Advice Network and check it out, or on your favorite podcast app. We broke down that we are a little bit nervous, especially with Brian Robinson, because of the matchup with Baltimore. Their defense hasn't necessarily been great protecting things through the air, but nobody's really been able to run on him, and he's banged up on top of it. You're really hoping for particularly a touchdown or bust situation. So be careful with Brian Robinson this week, but you probably don't have a better option. Bijan Robinson kind of popped up with a hamstring. Now, what I was saying, it doesn't sound like, and nobody in Atlanta seems to be too worried about this, but what is your take here?
Yeah, and apparently he actually was dealing with this a week ago as well, where he later in the week popped up with the hamstring injury listed on the injured report. So hopefully it's just some soreness or some tightness in the hamstring, not an actual injury that he's been getting treatment for and maybe doing some limited activity at practice as a precautionary move, and that's it. Let's hope that's all it is. It seems to be that's what's going on right now. So I think we'll just kind of stick with that and ride that wave as long as we can. I got Bijan on a couple of teams, so I don't want him to be hurt, and I don't want him to be playing through a hamstring injury. So let's just hope it's some soreness or maybe some tightness.
I'm with you, Brian. I got Bijan everywhere too. I was big on him this year. Took him ahead of McCaffrey, which, I mean, I guess that part's a good thing. But at the same time, like, I expected more. We finally got a matchup here with Carolina, who everybody runs on. And now you're telling me he's going to be a little bit banged up. I mean, look, if you have Bijan, hopefully you had the foresight to get Tyler Algier on your team. And Algier might be a flex play regardless of whether Bijan plays or not. We saw Roshan Johnson as the backup DeAndre Swift fall in the end zone twice. Like, that's how bad Carolina is. Everybody in the backfield on every team can go off here. So hopefully he's going to be okay, because we were dying for that big week, and this week was shaping up to be that. Rhamondre Stevenson, Brian, just, as a medical professional, don't you love it when players tell you not to worry about an injury and then they go out there and not practice?
Yeah. Oh, that's the best. And the funny thing is, they're no better than the coaches.
No, they're really not. They're really not.
But
yeah. So what's your take on Stevenson?
We don't know the extent of this. We don't know exactly what he's dealing with. We'll see if he does anything tomorrow. If not, doesn't look good for the weekend. Like you said, second day, didn't practice. He's telling you not to worry, but until you see him on the field actually doing anything, you always have to worry. I'm sure he'll be heading into with a questionable tag if he can't get a full practice in tomorrow. So Keep an eye on that. It may be a true game time decision if that's the case. This may be one of those situations where he thinks he's ready to go, but the team's not, and they may make him test it out before the game. So you might have to pay attention that 90-minute mark before kickoff when they have to make the roster list official. So pay close attention.
Yeah. And look, it's been worth owning Antonio Gibson anyway. It has been great for the Patriots, 100%. But Antonio Gibson's been involved enough to be owned in most leagues, I think, in my opinion, to this point, regardless. And if Rhamondre Stevenson misses, well, then at least you know who's getting all the work. It would be Antonio Gibson. They got a new quarterback coming in who's probably going to play things very, very close to the line of scrimmage. Drake May has the ability to play RPO. He is a guy who's willing to check the ball down, was willing to do so in college. So Rhamondre plays. I still had him as a top 20 play. If not, Antonio Gibson will probably ring around that low in RB2, high in RB3 for me. All right, we got to dive into Houston Texans. Now, there feels like there's movement finally with Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, actually, I think Dameon Pierce could potentially return this weekend. He started practicing actually last Friday, and then looks like he might be ramping it up this week. He got a limited session in yesterday. I'm not sure what he did today, but we'll see what he can do tomorrow. But it sounds like they're optimistic that he could be ready to go. which is good.
He was
because
full today. Damian Pierce is full today.
There you go. Even better. That kind of goes right along with what I was saying. So, and then you factor in that Joe Mixon continues to struggle, coming off his high ankle sprain. In fact, I think today he was actually limited, but that's like the first practice he's had in multiple weeks. And this injury goes back to week 1. And initially, I was saying with the high ankle sprain, it's almost all, even if it's mild, which is what they were reporting. I told you there was never a mild high ankle sprain. It's going to be at least 4 weeks, maybe 6. And now we're starting to get closer to that 6-week mark. I mean, here we are. He's like 4.5, 5 weeks in, and just now getting back on the practice field. So it looks like we're probably not going to see him at the earliest till week 7 here. Why they didn't put him on IR, I don't know. Maybe they thought it wasn't as bad. Maybe he's kind of milking it a little bit. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't want to make any roster moves. But no surprise here to me. I've been kind of calling it all along. This is what you get when you're talking about high ankle sprains from hip drop tackles that were not penalized, but the player who did make the tackle did get fined. So at least the NFL did retroactively hopefully discourage that from happening again.
Yes, for sure. And yeah, so in the case of Joe Mixon, no, I'm with you. I'm not expecting him to play this week. Now, with Damian Pierce probably on his way back, this is what makes things a little bit tricky because you've been leaning on Cam Akers. He's the main runner, especially inside. Daria Agunbowale had a much bigger role, I think, anybody anticipated last week when he had 15 carries, but he's always been the pass-catching back. If Damian Pierce comes into this thing, I don't want to touch anybody in the Houston backfield. I would not be surprised if it was a 3-man committee. This coaching staff has made it known in the past that they're not big Damian Pierce fans, so what his role even is could be a question mark in this one. Unfortunately, if you've had Joe Mixon, you've been riding Cam Akers, been riding a Daria Agunbowale, you may have to look elsewhere and not even play the handcuff because there might be too many handcuffs to Joe Mixon this upcoming week. With that, sticking with the Texans, but moving into the wide receivers, Nico Collins, this is a big blow because he's been the number 1 receiver so far in fantasy football, and he went on the IR for this hamstring issue.
Yeah, this is a big story here. I didn't see the injury. I don't know what happened on the play, or if it was something that they discovered afterwards, but he is officially out for 4 games, not weeks, games. So don't forget, if they have a bye during that time, that's going to roll it over another week on IR with this hamstring injury. Again, like we've talked about a lot in the past, these hamstrings take a long time to get better. Unfortunately, it's really hard to simulate game-like conditions. So until he's able to get back on the practice field after having done several weeks of rehab, you won't really know what you're going to get until he's able to test it out and go full speed in a simulated type practice or a game-like session. So this is going to be a longer than 4-week thing. They have 21-day window with which to get him off IR when the time comes. We'll have to see if he's able to hop back in there right away, or if this is going to be something that they use all that 21-day window to determine whether or not he's good to go.
Yeah, so this is rough. Now, in his absence, of course, that means there's, more consolidated target share, right? It's going to be Stephon Diggs will likely be the number 1. And for those of you who are about ready to give up on Tank Dell, don't, because now all of a sudden he might get some more extra targets heading his way, and maybe that'll help him finally get going. He just has not looked as sharp so far this season in his routes and his separation, but if he gets more involved, it may get the juices flowing there. So still a wide receiver 3 for me, and Stephon Diggs a strong wide receiver 2 play. And also don't look past Dalton Schultz. I mean, he's somebody who's always been a little bit involved anyway. This consolidation around him, especially if Joe Mixon's still not back yet, Dalton Schultz might be tipping into that top 12 tight end territory because we know how desperate that position has been. I got an unfortunate and surprising one at wide receiver here with the Giants. Malik Neighbors still not practicing with that concussion issue.
Yeah. So, not likely that he'll get through the protocol in the next day here. So we're definitely not going to see him. That makes 2 weeks in a row now. His concussion, and I think we talked about this when it first happened, was concerning in the sense that he didn't really have a tremendous amount of contact. All he really did was make a catch and fall to the ground, and it was that contact with the ground while he was trying to keep both feet in bounds that actually caused a concussion, not from a direct hit from an opponent or anything. So, with little trauma happening and a significant concussion where we're now heading into week 2, you have to wonder, is this something that's going to be an issue with him or come back to haunt him throughout his career? Because as we know, concussions have a cumulative effect, and these things sometimes can get much worse as they happen more frequently and can happen with even less contact next time. So something to be concerned about for a young player who looks like he's going to be a stud in this league for hopefully many years to come. But, it could just be the Giants are taking it safe and playing it safe and not rushing him back. And he's still having some very mild or slight symptoms that they're just not willing to force the issue, which is fine if that's what they're doing. I think that's great. But, from the outside looking in, it is a little concerning.
Yeah, so hopefully it doesn't sound like it's gonna be this week. Hopefully it is the following week here, and he's gonna be okay because Malik Neighbors was off to a rocket ship start. In his stead, Wan'Dale Robinson's been heavily involved, but Darius Slayton here. And remember, the Giants are playing the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a great matchup for perimeter wide receivers, and Slayton's coming off a 100-yard performance in his own right. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but Daniel Jones has looked decent the last couple of weeks, actually, especially against porous defenses. And I say that holding my breath because we know how bad it can turn around at any given moment. But right now, Darius Slayton's worth a pickup and play. Wan'Dale Robinson's worth a pickup and play in these flex spots as these wide receiver threes. I have them both inside my top 36 at the wide receiver position. So look to go that way. Two more receivers on the same team, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs. Now, I do wonder, are they hurt or did they hear Anthony Richardson was coming back and they decided, I don't really want to play anymore? No, I'm being facetious. What's your breakdown here with Pittman and Josh Downs?
Well, I'll say this because I am a Giant fan, and I will give my interpretation on the Giants real quick here. I know this wasn't part of the script, Dan, but,
Go for it.
Darius Slayton looked like the Darius Slayton of a couple of years ago, just this past weekend, and Daniel Jones now is going with Dable calling the plays. So this could be something that's working to their advantage. They're familiar with each other. Jones and Slayton have had a good rapport throughout their careers together, and maybe Dable calling the plays for Jones is what Jones needed. So we'll see. But now to get back to the Colts wide receiver situation here. So, Josh Downs was dealing with this high ankle sprain for several weeks. They played it right. He was out, I think, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, which is a good amount of time. He able to make it back, and now he's developed some type of new toe injury in this past weekend's game. Nothing serious, hopefully, but him and Pittman, who's now dealing with some type of lower back injury, were both out of practice yesterday. I'm not sure what they did today. Maybe and now we've got to know.
Downs was still out, and Pittman they're talking about as a potential IR candidate.
Correct.
I
read that too. I read that they're now considering, or he possibly could go on IR. So very, very unfortunate turn of events here. Josh Downs was supposed to have a breakout year, or at least a much better year this year after having some issues last year, or actually playing well last year, and this was his second year. So, I have him on a couple of fantasy teams too. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on what happens here. With him, it could truly be a game time decision. But again, he's got to get back on the practice field by tomorrow, and we may not know.
Well, here's the problem. If Richards is going to start, Josh Downs isn't in your lineup. I don't care if he's healthy or not. He doesn't look his way. That's not who he's targeting. He's not accurate. The only person he might hit, especially now with Pittman out, maybe you want to take a flyer on if you're in a desperate situation, would be an Alec Pierce. I don't love the matchup against Tennessee this week, who has a very, very good secondary, but the only person he's been able to hit that's been worth anything fantasy-wise has been Alec Pierce on a bomb play, and it only takes one play with him. So maybe it's a flyer from that standpoint. Maybe you want to play him in your DFS lineups, but that's the only receiver that even fits my fancy. There might not be a Colt that I really want to play. Like I said, Trey Sermon, if you absolutely have to. These wide receivers, don't want to touch him. It's Anthony Richardson. I don't want to touch Anthony Richardson, who can't get going fantasy-wise either. It's bad if you have any shares of the Colts here right now. It's not so great. We talked about Derek Carr, but Rashid Shaheen has been dealing with a hip issue so far this week in practice as well.
Yeah, hopefully it's just a minor, little hip pointer or something not serious. Maybe a little groin tightness or strain, but nothing serious. He was limited yesterday. He was out yesterday, but did come back in a limited fashion today. So he's trending in the right direction. Hopefully he'll do a little more tomorrow. Could be a game time decision. But with all these other injuries to the quarterback position, Shaheen's been very effective with David Carr. I'm guessing they're going to try to do what they can to get him in the lineup.
Yeah, we'll have to see. But again, if it's Spencer Rattler, Shahid's nothing more to me than a low-end wide receiver 3. I mean, yes, he's been more utilized than Chris Olave, but Rattler's not going to throw the ball down the field the way Derek Carr was, especially not as effectively. And that's where Rashid Shaheed's been making his big plays off of. Yes, he's been targeted a lot, but his majority of his fantasy points have been on the big play still so far this season. I'm not loving it. I don't know if you have a better option with the way he's played necessarily, and 4 teams on bye, but I might be looking elsewhere regardless. What's going on with Christian Watson? It seems like this may not have been as serious as we originally thought.
Yeah, I mean, you would have thought the guy's career was over the way he got carted off the field during his week 4 injury, which turned out to be a lot milder than they originally thought, including Watson himself. He thought originally, like, oh my God, I've really done something bad here. He said he was in a tremendous amount of pain at the time of the injury, and then fast forward a few days, he felt significantly better in a short period of time, which was very encouraging. And then he got back to a limited practice yesterday and today. This could be one of those things where they might ramp him up slowly after this weekend. He might be listed questionable. He could be a true game time decision. Hard to predict. If they're smart, they will wait until next week and bring him back along during the week of practice into week 7. But we'll see what he does tomorrow and whether or not he's actually in pads and warming up with the team on Sunday.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, he's like I say, limited practice, like I've been saying. I feel like I'd be a little bit surprised if he was active this week. Now, I don't know if that's just because I have a lot of shares of Datavian Wicks and I don't want him to play yet because I want Wicks to get the opportunity at least for one more week. But it's hard to fathom that we're going to go from this being like basically a low ankle sprain and all of a sudden he's back in 2 weeks too. So it's hard for me to fathom that as well. We'll keep our eyes on this. This would affect, like I said, Datavian Wicks quite a bit. Doesn't do anything to Jaden Reed for me. The fact that Romeo Dobbs is back would mean that if Watson's playing, him and Wicks would go back into the split that we saw kind of going on between those two earlier in the season. And therefore both guys might be nothing more than wide receiver 4 flyers at that point. So we'll have to keep you guys up to date over the weekend. Let's go to the tight ends. We've got 2 to talk about, and then we'll wrap up the show. We got Evan Engram still trying to make his way back from the hamstring. Is this the week?
I'm going to say no here, Dan. And, we talked about him.
Still.
Yeah, well, listen, I know this guy. He's a former Giant. I mean, this is not surprising. I said this even when he first went out with his hamstring injury, which was week 1, by the way. Week 1, okay? He didn't make his return week 5, even though he had practiced in a limited fashion leading up to that week's game. So that should tell you right there what you need to know. Unless we see him get out there and test this thing in a full session, I ain't ready to say he's coming back. And even if he did, I think he'll probably be favoring that hamstring. He might not be willing to go all out on that thing. We may not see him very productive in the passing game, which at his position and with his skill set is what he was brought on to do. So take that for what it's worth and you make up your mind. But as a former Giant fan and as a former Giant player, I've seen what he does and does not do on the field of play. And I'm not surprised by the turn of events here.
Yeah, I mean, look, people are so desperate for a tight end to actually perform that, Evan Engram, he comes back, they may just plug him in the lineup just because he's active. It's just been that bad, the position. I'm kind of with you on the idea that unless he logs a full session, I don't know if he's going to be active. And for the people out there that are saying like, well, he traveled with the team to London. The Jaguars are in London for the next 2 weeks. Like, regardless of whether he's available this week, he was going to travel with the team to London because it's going to be 2 weeks. So I don't know how much you can even read into that. The good news is that he's practicing, and it sounds like he's progressing at least in the right direction. We're going to have to wait and see. I don't care that much about Brenton Strange other than being a mid-level tight end too. Taysom Hill. Now, I feel like the Saints could really use the Taysom Hill right about now to kind of help things out. But do you think there's any chance we're going to get him back?
Not this week. Rib fractures. They're saying multiple rib fractures were the diagnosis, and that usually takes several weeks. At least that's what I've been predicting since I heard this injury diagnosis come out the week he got hurt. So I think it's going to be several weeks. They haven't talked or said anything about him going on IR, so hopefully it'll be a week-by-week thing, which is reasonable when you're dealing with rib fractures. But this is a very painful injury. Just normal breathing and everyday stuff can be very painful. The thing is, though, when they do start to heal, the turnaround can be quite quick. But getting to that point is what takes the longest. And so it's going to be a few weeks before he's able to really do too much. But when he is on the practice field, we should see him quickly get back to game shape and be ready to go. So that's going to be kind of the telltale sign of when he's going to be close to getting back. Is as soon as he steps on that practice field, you know he's feeling good. Because this is not one of those things that kind of slowly gets better. This is usually one of these things that goes from like really, really painful, really uncomfortable to all of a sudden, hey, I feel pretty good today. And then each day after, you start making quick progress. So this is going to be a quick turnaround when it does happen, but it's going to be a couple weeks, I think, before we see that.
Yeah, unfortunate there. If you have an IR spot, I would stash Taysom Hill. We're just talking about the tight end position with Evan Engram, and like, look, you might get nothing out of him, or you might get 2 touchdowns out of him, which frankly is as good as you can hope for out of the other top 5 tight ends not named George Kittle right now at the moment anyway. So definitely worth stashing if you can. If not, for now, you might have to let him go on that waiver wire because, Brian, I'm with you on this. It might be a few more weeks, unfortunately, until we see Taysom Hill. With that, it's going to wrap up the show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you're checking out Operation Domination, your favorite podcast app, and on our YouTube channel at Fantasy Football Advice Network. Brian, you got the Injured List podcast. What's something you got coming up you want people to check out?
Yeah, I actually just released an awesome new episode earlier this week with a former BMX professional by the name of Josh Perry. This dude is an awesome guy, has an amazing story. He overcame multiple brain tumors and had a very successful career in BMX. So, I mean, he's just got an incredible comeback story. You would never guess that this guy's even had these issues. Listen to him talk and hearing how successful he was. So something worth checking out. Brings you kind of back down to reality and makes you think about how blessed we all are to have our health and stuff. So awesome dude, great episode. Check that out. He's a North Carolina native too. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get together and do something live together. But that, and then doing my normal stuff at That Sports Podcast Network with our TSS weekly updates and all that jazz. And then, our blog, Inside the Medical Tent, we put that out every Thursday. We put the new one out today, myself and Andrew LeDuc, so check that out too. And then, follow me on social media at Injured List Pod on Twitter or X, and then or the Injured List Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and the injuredlist.com, the website where you can find some more information.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow Brian Scott on social media. Absolutely worth the follow. That's how we get the edge here in fantasy sports nowadays, is knowing the injuries and what to expect out of them. We'll be back, Operation Domination. That is next Wednesday night at 9:30 to do a Week 7 preview. Oh, my God, the season's just flying by. And, of course, Brian, I'll be back next Thursday at 8 p.m. on FF Advice Network. So, guys, make sure you check it out. And, everyone, good luck this week. Hey there, I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.